Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Savvy Central Radio. This is your host, Christina Nitchman. Each week on Savvy, we host new individuals and business owners, inviting them to share their expertise, dreams, and lessons learned in their field of business. Today's guest is David Cagle. David is a New York licensed architect with over 25 years experience with a diverse background in corporate, civic, and preservation projects. David's firm focuses on delivering sustainable green residential designs at an affordable cost, allowing everyone the option to have a sustainable green design and construction in their business and in their homes. To connect with David's office, you can contact him via email at davidcagle@gmail.com. That is spelled DAVIDCAGLE architect@gmail.com. Hi, David. Thanks for coming to Savvy Central Radio today. How are you?
Hi, Christina. I'm well. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I'm excited to have you on Savvy today. First, had the pleasure of meeting you at a presentation you did at the NYBC Academy that Malco Ibas puts on once a month. And I was really intrigued at your story and how your firm has transformed to focus on and offer sustainable green technologies and materials in your architecture. Can you share with our audience a little bit more about your story and what led to your firm's focus in sustainable green designs and architecture?
Well, I will. I guess a bit about my personal background. I'm originally from Texas, grew up there, and moved to New York about 30 years ago. And my main interest in architecture revolves around residential work. And my real passion is about looking for and seeking suburban planning alternatives, housing alternatives. Growing up in Texas, that was sort of the epicenter of sprawl. And when I went to architecture school, I felt that there was really a better way to design our suburban cities. And that involved making them more urban, higher density, less dependence on the automobile, really pedestrian-oriented cities. So that's become a pretty big part of my focus and interest. The other thing that influenced me about growing up in Texas, I was surrounded by the energy business, both traditional, meaning oil and gas, also alternative energy. After moving to New York, I sort of watched from a distance as Texas became the leader in wind production. I'm not sure if many people are aware of that, but it actually surpassed California and is now the number one producer of wind energy. And that all sort of happened in my backyard, and it was fascinating to see that paradigm shift. So I'm very much interested in sort of the politics and the technology of energy. And one thing about architects that many people aren't quite aware of is that we spend a lot of our time thinking about technology and specifying technology for our clients. You know, we have to keep up on the latest products, the latest, systems, and make recommendations for our clients of what to purchase and how to build their buildings. So it's sort of in our blood, being aware of new technology. So I've sort of put all this together, and I'm maybe taking it to a larger scale, looking at having a global awareness of the new technologies emerging for energy and what we should be doing. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that today.
I'd love that. Because as you mentioned, now I didn't know that Texas was also the top leading state in green technologies and such. I had no idea.
Well, in particular, basically just for wind energy production. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. But it's good to know that because it clears up a lot of misconceptions people have that California is the leading in just all of green technology and such. With all the new advances that have come about with sustainable materials and such, allowing businesses and individuals more than ever to live in balance with nature and to create a business and homes that are sustainable, can you share some of these amazing advances that you've come across?
Well, one thing that I'm very interested in as far as energy, we could talk about energy and we could talk about construction technology if we have the time, but I could start with energy.
Okay.
And I think I should just start by saying that my interest, and I hope most of the listeners' interest, is in replacing our current system of energy generation with a non-carbon system. A system that doesn't produce greenhouse gases and lead to global warming. So there are choices out there. Some people would jump to nuclear fission or fusion. That's not really my interest. I think there are simpler and more elegant solutions. One thing to start out thinking about is that wind and solar electric now have become very, very cost effective. For example, photovoltaic cells now, the actual cell that generates electricity, these are the cells that you put on your roof and generate power.
Mm-hmm.
These have come down to the range of 50 cents, 55 cents per watt. And trade journals are saying now that they're expecting this price to drop down as low as 35 cents per watt. So what that means is that the actual raw cells, and these still have to be packaged into panels, and there has to be additional hardware, but the actual cells to produce enough energy, electricity for your home would fall in the range of $1,200 to $1,500, which is just extraordinary. That's affordable. And this has come from many, many countries, spending billions of dollars in research and really working on this problem. And it's finally come down. So we should be celebrating that. There, of course, solar electric and wind energy have the problem of being intermittent. In other words, the sun doesn't shine at night and the wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day. So the missing link in this whole equation is a storage system for power, so we can even out the access to power.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really where I believe we should be shifting our research money, our emphasis, our political focus should be shifting over now to energy storage. So where are we with that, and what am I interested in? I think there's an incredibly promising technology, and it's, again, I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with it, but it would be a category of ultracapacitors. Ultracapacitors are like a battery. But batteries like lithium-ion batteries and lithium nano batteries are all chemical-based. They collect, electric ions, and they collect them and they discharge them. But it's based on a chemical system. Whereas a capacitor is a solid-state device. It's like a transistor. It has no chemistry involved. It's really metal components and insulator components.
Mm-hmm.
And so this has the potential to actually surpass the storage capacity of chemical batteries, but the advantages would be over chemical batteries. The advantages would be that it could charge very rapidly. The drawback now with electric cars is to charge them, you sort of have to charge them overnight. It takes a couple of hours or more to fill the battery up with electrical power. And then you can only charge and discharge them so many times before the chemicals in the batteries wear out.
Mm-hmm.
So potentially an ultracapacitor could get past those two problems, and it could charge almost instantly, within minutes, almost the time it takes to fill your gas tank with gasoline, you could fill up with electricity. And then this device would theoretically last almost forever. It could charge and discharge without wearing out. And as it looks now, the companies that are working on this technology, it looks like the materials are going to be very, very common and affordable. So to me, that's sort of the holy grail. It's the missing piece of the puzzle that could make everything else really, really work and literally change our world in very radical, very positive. That's what I get excited about, and that's what I hope that people become aware of that and start fighting for it.
I love what you're saying there, and I'm blown away by the cost. It's really affordable because guess what? I've talked to a number of my friends who live in houses who are paying upwards of $600 a month in their house, some of them more than that, just for energy. And imagine that times 12. So
it's crazy. I mean, when I mentioned, Texas being a leader in wind power,
mm-hmm.
Even with transmission from these major wind farms transmitting at, say, 50, 80 miles, they're bringing energy in for 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's as cheap as it gets. So we really have arrived. But we just need the finishing touch to create the proper storage system, both for our homes and for our vehicles and for our workplaces. And once that happens, we're in a different world. I hope people, get excited about that and start striving.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what concerns me a little bit, and a couple of things came through for me as you spoke, and one would be the people, or I should say the businesses that have something vested in not switching off of carbon and switching to these more green energies, like say the oil companies or energy companies. And then hence the other problem being is that our general public has gotten very comfortable with convenience, with the way things have run. And switching would take a little bit of uncomfortability in the beginning. So what would be your advice to deal with those two issues?
Mm. No, that's a really good point. And I do think that one of the problems we have today is that we are comfortable. And, we turn the light switch on, the lights come on, and we've worked very hard to achieve that. So it's understandable that we're not anxious to switch to a new system, but people need to become aware that global warming is a threat to our species, and there are other reasons to switch. So the scenario that I see with this new technology will not be a large-scale grid. The idea of the smart grid and the idea of centralized power plants, big mega power plants, I think will be replaced by localized power generation. By localized, that could be scaled down to the neighborhood level. It could even be scaled down to your house. Mm. And it's actually a whole nother interest that I have. It's something called DC microgrids. And this is applicable to this. This is sort of a small scale local power generation and distribution. And by local, again, that can mean literally your house. And an interesting thing has sort of evolved now with all of our electrical devices. If you took an inventory of everything in your house, you would find that a lot of your devices are now actually running on DC power, direct current. Mm-hmm. When you plug into the wall, it's alternating current. It comes from the power generation plant is alternating. But for instance, your computer is probably, your laptop is certainly DC powered, and the little plug-in wall device you have is converting AC power to DC power. So the problem is when that makes that conversion from AC to DC power, there's a great loss in efficiency. Mm. And when we talked about your photovoltaic cells that might go on your roof, those are generating DC power. And what we do now is we take that DC power, we convert it to AC power, it comes into our house, we plug our computer into it, and it converts it back to DC. So it's gone through these iterations of conversion that can lose as much power as 40%. Mm. And when you add up 40% across the board, this is enough to eliminate oil imports. So the idea is that once we all start thinking about doing photoelectric cells on our roofs, we might start thinking about DC power system in our house and running everything on DC, except for the really high flux appliances like your washing machine that probably will always have to run AC power. But this is very exciting, huge energy savings, very, very cost effective, and then also eliminates all this massive macro scale grid infrastructure in the country that's aging and is going to be very expensive for this. So it's good news, and it's coming.
And do you know why, say, Con Ed or such hasn't switched to using DC completely in their distribution of energy?
This all goes back to you can go online and read all about this, the history. Originally, when we first invented electricity, and there was a debate between Tesla and Edison, mm-hmm. what AC or DC power would be on the grid. And actually, there were good reasons why AC power prevailed. AC power is easier to run long distances, and we had centralized power plants. If you run DC power long distances and you run along highline wires, it has a tendency to spark down to the ground, so that was always a problem. Mm. Now we're talking about, we've shifted now because like I said, a lot of our devices now are DC, mm-hmm. and we have the potential to produce on-site DC power and shift away from centralized AC power plants. So the whole paradigm is sort of shifted. Hmm. And it's just going to be like any other story about technological evolution. Big companies, the big power companies, are going to have to find ways to make profit as this system evolves. And as photovoltaic cells get cheaper and as DC power systems get more available and known about, the consumer, I think, will drive this change.
That's an awesome point. The one thing that has me concerned a little bit is that the energy companies and the oil companies and such that give us our carbon are kind of really invested in keeping things as they are. And often they have lobbyists in D.C. that keep our politicians keeping things status quo. So what I'm wondering is, do you have any helpful hints on how we can change that? And now you just mentioned that you feel that the general public will be the one to push this forward. Mm. But I think that we're going to come across some obstacles political-wise. And do you have any kind of helpful hints on how we can go forward with that?
Well, I think the first thing is that we mentioned this problem that everybody's sort of fat and happy right now. And I think we need to get over that, and we need to realize there's a real problem with carbon energy. There's a really great little saying that any energy in the future can't be produced by burning it.
Hmm.
That's just something that sort of maxim to keep in mind. If we realize that burning any fuel to create our energy will ultimately lead to global warming and our demise, then that should get us excited enough to take action.
Hmm.
So that's the main thing. We need to just start realizing there's a problem. We need to start thinking about taking action. I think the good news is that these technologies are out there, and they're relatively simple and they're relatively inexpensive. So that they will be, I think they have the potential to be implemented pretty easily. In other words, I think the entrepreneurs are going to come in and take over, and these products will be so cost effective that they'll almost be irresistible. In other words, if Home Depot has a plug-and-play package that's as easy to install as my plasma TV, and it say costs me $3,000, but that will generate power for my home for the next 20 years, then it's a bit irresistible. And so luckily, I think the technology is pretty simple and will be cost-effective. But the important thing, I think, is for the consumers to realize that this is important, there's a need for it, and to start encouraging, well, they can start encouraging companies to develop this faster. They probably need to do a little bit of research and see who these companies are and start encouraging them. They could also start investing in these companies. They might want to sell their oil stock and start buying ultracapacitor stock, companies like Maxwell. So they need to be more proactive about their choices they make as consumers. And I think that'll go a long way to shift them over.
I love that. As people become more aware and get their own education, don't take what we're saying here is absolute truth or not.
Absolutely. That's the first thing. You've got to start spending some time with the proper, technical journals and anything you can get your hands on that you believe is good information. And there are great blog sites out there. The information's out there, but you need to spend some time and discern what's good information, what's bad information, and start pursuing companies that you're interested in. If you want to take a next step, if you really get interested, I would encourage you to start communicating with some of these companies that you think are leading green companies. Communicate with them and ask them how they need to help, ask them what kind of help they need to move their product faster.
And what I love about this empowers the people, the entire country to take their own action to make things happen. Because I think often we feel in general public that, hey, we're just waiting for other people around us to take action, but another company, another business. But this can very well be done by a grassroots project of everyone getting involved and pushing for the change.
Absolutely. And one idea I like to think about is, we were all raised with this maxim of think globally and act locally.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be time to completely turn that upside down. Instead of thinking globally and acting locally, which plays out as, well, I'm going to change my light bulbs to a more efficient light bulb. I'm going to turn my thermostat down in the wintertime. I'm going to ride a bike more. That's acting locally, and that's all noble and good. But maybe it's time to look at the other end of the spectrum and start thinking about the big picture and say, what kind of power plant should my community have? And you can be sure that the people in Japan, they're not thinking about what type of light bulbs to put in. They're thinking about what kind of power plant to rebuild after Fukushima. And that's the scale that I think we need to shift up instead of looking down to the micro scale. We need to get political and think about the big picture.
I love that because it gives the power to the people and allows them to realize that, yes, you do have a choice and you can make a difference. I think, and I've heard this from one of my guests recently, often people will look for those around them to stand up and be the leaders for change. And right now, what it takes is every single person standing up and being a leader for change, and all of us together as a unit going forward to make this positive change going forward.
That's true. I agree completely.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been in business for quite some time as well, David. So what have you learned from building your own architecture business has been some of your greatest lessons you've learned and applied to your business and life?
Well, I think, of course, it's a cliche, but pursuing what you really love, what you're interested in, what you're most interested in, and perhaps choosing something that you think could really make a change. I think architects may be trained a little bit differently than other people. We were always trained to be problem solvers. And so we even had there was sort of saying that we always use is problem seeking. So we're always sort of on the lookout for what's wrong and sort of have this level of constructive discontent about the world. But to try to find solutions and try to make things better through problem solving. Never really be content with the status quo.
Mm. I love that. I love that because we can all strive for a better tomorrow.
That's true. Absolutely.
Yeah. What have you found? Has there been any individuals in your life or people in your life that have been major role models for you that have inspired you on your journey?
Well, quite a few. I think recently, probably the person that's doing the most that I really respect is Elon Musk. This is a guy that I think is still under 40, had probably the perfect education for our age. I mean, he has dual degrees in business and physics, which I think is very interesting today. And he's jumped in and really made use of his talents. I think he was a natural-born entrepreneur. He started his own software company, sold a game software, I think when he was 12 years old. I think that got into his blood. And so he was one of the co-founders of PayPal.
Wow.
But, he's gone on, of course, to found Tesla Motors, electric car business, and SpaceX. And he, by the way, is also very interested in the ultracapacitor. As a matter of fact, when he graduated from his undergraduate degree, he was on his way to Stanford to actually work on this work. So he's, I think, aside from Bill Gates, who now is going to, I think, very admirable foundation work, I think Elon Musk is one of our greatest technology implementers and innovators.
Yeah, I've seen a bio online on him and also a television program recently. I think it was on Discovery. He just blew me away. He's a fantastic genius mind. And it's great when you're sitting out there and you're feeling there's nothing I can accomplish. Look to people like him to inspire you to pull forward and be your better self.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty inspiring too. The guy has, 2 undergraduate degrees and he's building spacecraft. I think that's pretty encouraging in and of itself. I think a lot of us think we're not qualified to engage in such activities that we need, 3 PhDs to do the kinds of things he's doing. But, he knows that he can surround himself with experts and proceed. So it's pretty exciting.
Most definitely. Ford, who started the Ford company, many years ago, someone had mentioned he didn't have a degree, and he said, I don't need a degree. I just hire the right people that know the stuff I need to know, And I don't know the exact wordage, but it was kind of that same idea that, hey, I don't need to know everything. I hire people who do know what I need to know, and they give me the information I need.
Absolutely. And that's a great trait in and of itself, to delegate and to realize your shortcomings and to hire the right people. That's something to be said for that.
Most definitely, most definitely. What have you found, David, along your journey has been some of your greatest achievements or successes in your life?
I hope that my greatest achievements are probably sitting in my computer right now. I've actually had quite a bit of time to work on designs for these new houses that I was referring to early in the conversation. I'm very interested in new ways to build our suburban environments. And, suburbia makes up the majority of our built environment in America. I think there are better ways to do it. So I've really been spending a lot of time, designing individual houses and designing the way these houses come together as neighborhoods and come together as cities. And I'm looking forward to getting them built. So if anybody out there is a developer who would like to do an amazing green project and implement a lot of these ideas we talked about, I'd be happy to talk.
Yeah, please reach out to David. And I was really inspired when you did your talk at the NYBC Academy, and you had mentioned a number of the things you use for building green, sustainable materials and such. And it's just amazing out there, the choices that we have today that weren't available just a couple of years ago, maybe 10, 20 years ago.
Absolutely. That's a whole other conversation. I mean, I might just touch on that because it's just outrageously exciting. And I think maybe even part of it has to do with this economic downturn we've had for the past 4 years or so, because people have really gone back to the drawing board and sort of gone back to their laboratories, and they've had time to think about, well, what if I could do this the right way? And there's been a lot of innovation that's happened in the past 4 or 5 years. And particularly in the construction industry, there's this one company that I mentioned that night that I'm just fascinated by. I'm actually going to get on the train and go down and meet these guys. It's a father and son team. Father has been a lifelong Mason and became really interested in the history of construction in Europe and all the way back to the Roman times. And he's gotten very involved with lime, which was sort of the basis of most Roman construction and was used as mortars throughout colonial construction. We've since replaced that with Portland cement, and it's sort of a long technical story why lime has great potential, but they have come up with this genius idea of taking the concrete block industry, which is ubiquitous throughout the world and certainly throughout America, and replacing the Portland cement binder in these blocks with lime. And that sounds like a minor thing, but it's huge because Portland cement is not the most environmentally friendly product. Mm. And it makes a block that doesn't have any inherent insulative qualities. It conducts heat and cold, so it's not a very good product to live in. Mm. But lime, they can fill the core of these blocks with an insulated lime. And essentially, they're making a wall that once it cures, and lime sets up and cures over weeks, actually, it's almost like building a stone wall. Mm. But the wall now has incredible insulator value to it. And you wind up with a homogeneous lime wall instead of all these different components that we put together to create our current walls. I mean, today, a wood frame wall has about 7 different components and 7 different trades, so it's winds up being very time-consuming, very expensive. This wall could potentially have 1 or 2 trades and 1 or 2 materials. So I believe it's completely game-changing, and I'm just I can hardly sleep at night at this. It's amazing. Again, I'd love to talk to people about it. It's coming. Watch out for it. The company's called Virginia Lime Works. Mm. It's remarkable. And so simple. And, we got like 105,000 registered architects in America, and none of us thought of this.
Wow.
It came from these guys. It's brilliant.
I find that so amazing, Dave, and I found that to be true even in my own life when difficulty or crisis emerges, how innovation comes about because of it. And we all hate those times in our lives when difficulty comes about and it's like, oh, I want this to be over. But those are the times in which we become our greatest because we innovate idea that we wouldn't have come up with if things were simple, if they weren't difficult, if we didn't have this crisis.
Well, absolutely. And I think this whole downturn is sort of giving people a sabbatical, too. Sabbaticals are great. Mm-hmm. Just sometimes we don't get the opportunity. And I think this has given people a lot of opportunity to rethink how they would do it again. And I think there's a silver lining to this.
Most definitely. And I'm really seeing the emergence of small businesses kind of bringing America back on its feet business-wise instead of super big corporations. The entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and small businesses are the ones who are going to transform America and make it strong again.
Well, I think so. And you can't say enough about the internet is offering outlets for connections and communication, distribution, and you have an instant global market. You just can't say enough about that. So there's almost no excuse. If you have a great idea, it's going to get out there very quickly. But having said that, I am sort of shocked at how many great innovations are out there and how they actually are not being plugged in yet. I think we have no lack of innovation in this country, but we do have an implementation problem. Mm. And I'd like to see, and that's again where all of the listeners can get involved and start looking for these great new companies, these great new technologies and products, and get behind them, promote them, buy them, and talk them up, and let people know that there really are better solutions out there, and they exist in these new technologies, new companies, and get to know the companies. I mean, pick up the phone and call them.
Mm-hmm. David, why do you think that there's more innovation going on than implementation? Do you feel that people just don't feel comfortable acting out, or they feel like they're just waiting for the next person to do it, or what do you think?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think you sort of touched on it earlier. There are a lot of vested interests in keeping the status quo. I guess technology, people refer to that as technology lock-in. Mm-hmm. And it has to do with companies that are already in the business of certain technologies, and it's easier for them to keep going with the systems they have. Mm-hmm. The little guy comes up with a better idea. He has to convince an existing market that his idea is better. Mm-hmm. So I think what's really needed, we sort of need technology patrons out there. It's almost like the de Medicis. We need a 21st century de Medici who goes out and looks at these new things and says, I'll be the person that will step up and implement this and showcase it. it's almost like we need on a smaller scale, sort of like we haven't had World's Fairs in a long time, but we need a vehicle to showcase these new ideas, these new technologies. And in a way, I think it has to come from wealthy, enlightened patrons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you're not wealthy, then maybe you can find a wealthy person and convince them this is the way to go. But somebody has to step up and take the initiative and help these inventors and these companies along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a call to everyone out there. Everyone knows someone, at least 100 people. And yeah, it's true. I found that at least 100 people, maybe not super well like family members, but at least 100 people, and they know at least 100 people. So everyone can reach out to everyone around them. And for anyone out there who does have a bit of money and feel like, hey, I want to figure out more about this and see if this is something that I can make a difference in the world with. Because here's a misconception about money and wealth is a lot of people seem to think that the wealthy are kind of stingy and they don't like to share. And a good portion of people out there, as you mentioned earlier, like Bill Gates, they readily give a lot of their money to charities and such. But like you said, we have to convince some of those super wealthy people out there to see this is very important and to the benefit of all of mankind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the government can do a little bit. There's a program called ARPA-E that's run by the Department of Energy. And it's probably one of the best examples of how to, bring new technologies forward and how to sort of kickstart them a little bit. And it's great because it's a jury of peers for technology. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a scientist or if I'm an engineer and I know of somebody who has a great new idea, I can nominate them for this prize. And, the government's giving away sort of $1 million, $2 million grants, enough for them to help get their ideas into a prototype or even onto the market. And what's great, it culminates in a trade show every year in D.C. So not only do they get backing money, but they get this central exposure and try to make a pretty big deal of it. But it's just a great idea. And of course, Bill Gates is, very interested. And his comment about it is it needs to be 10 times larger. And I agree. But I think it's a great template. It's something that everybody should take a look at and see how it works. It's getting a lot of, and also obviously look at the companies that have won these competitions because they're fascinating, great companies. Well, I think the great thing about Elon Musk too, he's realized that electric car is inherently different, and he wanted to start with a blank sheet of paper, and he wanted to make it accommodating and sexy, and that's why he started out with the small Roadster. It was a very fast, exciting car, and he wanted to sort of cut to the end game of speed and appeal. Mm-hmm. And so he's really did a great job of that.
Yes, he did.
But
yeah.
He's extremely interested in design and accommodation and function. So plus, you mentioned backing a company like that. His stock, as you probably know, has just gone through the roof. Mm-hmm. You would have done very well if you would have put money in Tesla about 9 months ago. Mm. So that's rewarding.
Absolutely. So what is on the horizon for your company in the next year or so?
Well, as I mentioned, I hope that these designs will come out of my computer and actually become real, become materialized. That's my hope. I think it's time. There are so many of these great innovative ideas and products, and I'd like to showcase them all. I'd like to put them all together into a demonstration project to show people what's possible. We've gone a long time doing things the same way. And I think people will be sort of pleasantly surprised what's available now. So I'm looking for backers and looking for opportunities to build these new types of communities.
Awesome, David. Before we end out here, I'd love for you to give our audience, anyone out there who wants to be that backer for David and his company and get these amazing technologies out there in a big, viable way, how can they get in contact with you, David?
Well, I'd be happy to give my email out to people if they like. Okay, it's davidcaglearchitect@gmail.com. So it's David, Cagle, architect, singular, no S at the end of that, @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David. And before we end out here, I'd love if you can leave our audience your last words of advice for our listeners.
Well, I suppose it'd be like I said earlier, I think just start by dedicating a little bit of time every day to study these new technologies and try to get personally involved with these technologies and companies as you can. Try to help them along.
Mm-hmm. And I loved your earlier advice of innovation's great, but now we need some implementation. So,
Yes.
yeah.
All of you are the implementers, and it comes by doing as much as you can for these companies that you respect and believe are the answers, and get as personally involved as you can.
Thank you so much, David. It's been awesome having you on Savvy Central Radio to share this very important topic. Thank you again, David.
Well, thank you, Christina. Appreciate it.
Join us this Friday, November 1st, for our first episode of the month with J.J. Greenway, Capitol Hill Advisor for General Aviation. We're going to discuss the future of aviation.